going to introduce Jeff Forristal. He is from BlueBox, and his talk is on Android FakeID vulnerability walkthrough. Jeff?
Thank you. So hopefully I'll be entertaining for the next 25 minutes. If I happen to cut in a minute or two out of lunch, sorry, but hopefully I'll make it worth it. Right? So my name is Jeff Forristal. I'm the CTO of BlueBox. We're a mobile security company. We're the same group that, the same company that discovered and did the master key vulnerability last year here at Black Hat. And me personally, I've been actually contributing publicly to the security industry now for 15 years, and I've been doing more security stuff even more than that. So there's some old school folks in the crowd who may remember me from my shiny shirt days and SQL tampering and all that silliness. So I've certainly been around doing fun things like this in Black Hats for quite a while. So what am I doing here on this stage today? I'm here to talk to you about this cute little bug. This bug just basically has this number, right, and that's a bug track number. This bug is kind of interesting because it's a complete security sandbox escape. It is definitely usable by malware in a completely stealth fashion, and it inevitably allows things like data theft and potentially in certain circumstances full device compromise. Right? And all of it comes down to by presenting a little fake signature identity to the system, which is why we've been calling it the FakeID vulnerability. It's been in the press starting last week, and basically I'm here to give you all of the glorious geeky details of how this thing works and show you a live demo. So, because this has to do with identities and signatures, I'm gonna have to fill your brains with some useless PKI stuff, info, and how signatures kind of play out in the Android system. I promise you I'll keep it to a bare minimum. It won't go one bit over, but I gotta at least show you some of the basics. So, in the Android device, applications are signed, right? Standard PKI digital signing concepts for every application, the whole application itself and all the files inside the application bundle are just a part of a digital signature. This digital signature that the application signed with is pretty fundamental in terms of the Android security architecture. It's used all over the place. You'll see it referenced in permissions and package updates and all kinds of stuff. So when you actually look at what Android's calling a signature, right, it's an opaque blob of binary gook, practically speaking, it's actually a public certificate, right? This is the same kind of public certificate you'd expect to find, say, on a website, right? It's reusing that same technology, all these digital certificate stuff. In terms of how the digital signing works of an application, that's kind of showed on the bottom, where it all starts with a PKCS digital signing object, just a blob of data. Right? That signs a signature file. The stuff in the signature file has integrity information for the manifest file. The manifest file has integrity information for the application itself. This is standard Java jar signing. There's nothing special here. And for those of you who flash back to last year, there was a problem with this four little chained path right here, and that's what the master key bug was. That's been fixed, so that path and chain is good now. Now, we're going to talk about certificates in this talk. And there's two kind of fundamental certificate concepts that are pretty important to at least kind of follow along with what's happening here. The first idea is a concept of a self-signed certificate. What is a self-signed certificate? It basically means that certificate uses its own private key to sign itself, which really means it's not issued by anyone. You just basically, it's a standalone certificate. It's self-generated, self-signed. It's relatively anonymous is really what it comes down to. Android's security model was built around the idea that, quite honestly, self-signed anonymous certificates are fine. Most applications use self-signed standalone certificates. It's completely cool. And in terms, it all works out, and I'll show you why. But now, in addition, and if you think in terms of like websites and normal PKI in a web browser, you know, self-signed certificates throw up a security alert in a web browser. Because in the web browser world, right, you can be issued a certificate by a trusted authority, a certificate authority, or CA. And to have that happen, basically a child certificate, you start by generating a certificate, and then what happens is that the issuer, that CA, essentially uses their private key to sign the child cert. So in this regard, you can kind of see with that green arrow on the bottom, right, where the child cert on the left claims he was issued by the entity, the issuer of the child cert is the subject of the issuer, right? And then that signing kind of happens and the cryptographic stuff kind of is all included there. So you got self-signed, and then you've got an issued certificate that has a relationship. Now, when certificates are issued, an issuer could be an issuer of an issuer, and you can work backwards. Once we start making a chain, we call this a certificate chain. This is really valid standard PKI stuff. This is all over the internet in terms of SSL and web browsers, right? This is how it goes. And what winds up happening is that fundamental one all the way on the right is your trusted root cert. That's the one where your web browser trusts, and anything they issue, and then every kind of child from there that issues, all becomes trusted. This is how standard PKI works. But what we've got here is you can see, even though you've got your child cert on the left, and that's your private key, it's got relationships with this rest of the chain, with these issuers, all their parents. Now, on a normal day in Android doesn't care about the chain. Whether it's one cert or more than one cert in a chain, it really doesn't care. Because it treats the whole chain as an opaque blob. And so things like, for those of the Android savvy tech folks in the crowd, things like signature permissions and application updates where they actually do a signature comparison, what's really happening is that they're doing a full array compare of all possible certs, matching it to some other destination of all possible certs, right? So never in Android does it care about how many certs are in the chain. It does a full compare of the entire chain. Full chain to full chain comparisons at all times. That's how the fundamental security model works. And I wouldn't be here if there wasn't a problem with that. So let's talk about a slight bug, right? Going back to that little fake ID bug. Now, what if, rather than treating the whole chain as one opaque blob, we instead had code that went to each individual cert in that chain one by one by one, and it was just looking for one cert of trust. And by that one cert being present, maybe it'll trust the whole chain. The code to do this would reasonably resemble this, right? And so what am I generally saying is, imagine code that actually goes through this chain line by line. I don't like this cert. I don't like this cert. I come across one. Guess what? I like that cert. I like that one. Not the chain, just that one in the chain. Right? And so this logic essentially will accept one trusted cert anywhere in a chain of who knows how many certs. If one's good, they're all good, is kind of the concept, right? Now this code, this logic that could do this, right, is theoretical, but interesting enough, it's actually not theory. It does exist in the Android code base in some very specific places. Here's an example of one of those places buried in the WebKit plugin manager. This is out of OSP Code right here. OSP Code means, guess what? It's on all Android devices, right? And unfortunately, what you don't see here, lines around 200, if you scroll back up, you'll see a hard-coded Adobe certificate right there buried in the code. This code is looking for a specific hard-coded certificate. Hard-coded right there in the OSP code base, shipped with all phones. So we've got this, if one cert in the chain can be the one that these trusted certs are looking for, what do we need to do here? Well, from an attacker perspective, can I make a certificate chain that includes an arbitrary chosen cert? That's kind of the goal. And so to really answer that question, I've got to go look at the code that's responsible for creating these chains. This is it. This is all of the code responsible for that chain. Now, granted, I realize you can't read it, but fundamentally, what does it do? First, when you install an app, it checks all the signature, so it's properly signed, everything checks out, all the manifest integrity looks good. Assuming that's all happy, next what it does is say, okay, cool. Now, if this cert, this child signing cert, is a part of a chain, figure out who its parent is, go dip into a bag of more certs, string match the issuer to the subject, and as long as you can find one that matches, that's the parent, add them to the chain. So if you caught what I just said there, a string match of an issuer string to a subject string, which you say, hang on, right? isn't there a cryptographic relationship somewhere going on here? Well, I mean, if this was the web, yes. But what's interesting in that code was that crypto stuff, crypto sucks, that's stupid, it's not there, right? It's just not present. They don't actually cryptographically verify that the child certificate who claims to be from an issuer was actually from that issuer. Imagine me calling up saying, I'm Jeff Forristal, I work for, well, BlueBox, of course you know that to be true, but imagine I didn't, right? And they say, oh yeah, that sounds legit, go ahead. You're from BlueBox, and BlueBox, we know them, so go ahead, right? It doesn't verify that claim ultimately. Which means if we can now add certs to our cert chain, but we don't have to worry about pesky cryptography proving us wrong and lying, we can go ahead and accomplish exactly what we want. And it makes code that does that enumeration through the cert chain array pretty easy to exploit or bypass. So the construction of what you would aim for is you'd start by making your own self-signed cert, a standalone, nothing to do with anyone else, complete self-signed cert, right? Your attacker cert. And you gotta have the target cert you want to trust. Just the public pieces of the cert. You don't need the cert's private key. This has nothing to do with compromising someone's private key and certificate, nothing to do with that, right? You just need their public certificate. Then what you wind up doing is the attacker will modify their cert and change the issuer, saying that my issuer is that trusted cert. Now in doing that, it's going to completely break its cryptographic issuer signature. That's not going to come out and work in terms of the cryptography is going to say this is completely bogus. But remember, we don't check that. Android doesn't check that. So we don't care that we broke the signature. It's not used. So, and that's it. And at this point, we're in a game on scenario where that same code, when it enumerates through, does it like our individual child cert? No. But then does it get to that trusted cert? And does it like the trusted cert? Absolutely. And that's exactly kind of what we want to aim for. So now, that theory, that's how the vulnerability works. All this silly little chain stuff. But the question is, what can you do with it? Right? What's the implications? What's the ramifications? What do I actually put in the chain? What certs? Any apps? All good questions. So what we wound up doing is going through the entire OSP code base, basically doing a fine grep for every piece of code that does anything with an application signature, and then reviewed every single one. So it's kind of like a manual source code review for every uses of signature on Android. And due to other endeavors that we have, we also did a lot of third-party kind of components that involve extra privileges tied to certificates. So things like security containers, device management extensions, device control extensions. These are security sensitive. They all tie into this identity stuff. We looked at them as part of this to kind of see who's susceptible to all of these signature things and how are they checking these signatures. So we found a couple of really compelling, really unfortunate places where these things can actually be pretty damaging. So one of them, the most widest one, is in the WebKit WebView plugin. Right there, like I was saying, that previous code I splashed up, Adobe's certificate is hard-coded in Android prior to KitKat so that Adobe can ship a Flash plugin to an Android device and get special privileges for the Flash plugin to leave the sandbox and be shoved into every other app, so all the other apps can use the Flash plugin as part of their web view inside the app. So this is not anything to do with standard how you think about like normal app permissions and app installations. This is Adobe, that one certificate getting special advantage hard-coded right there in AOSP to do something completely interesting and different in terms of the security model. Some other ones, great example, NFC access. So there's basically like a little firewall on what apps are allowed to access the NFC secure element, the little secure kind of piece of hardware for NFC-equipped devices. The secure element's kind of what Google Wallet would use in terms of your wireless credit card sales, right? Point of contact type stuff. Normally, the signature of an app or an app developer will be included in the NFC access firewall. So any app signed by that cert is allowed SE access and then can proceed to do all those interesting Google Wallet type transaction stuff. Here we basically found that it's pretty easy to spoof that signature check. As long as I have that cert that's configured in the NFC access, I can make an arbitrary app, use Google Wallet Identity, for example, and get access to all that secure hardware that's processing the credit card payments. Or transactions, right? Now, there's more to it than that, but generally speaking, this firewall exists for a reason. We just found a way to get around that firewall. Another interesting case is 3LM. 3LM is a particularly interesting one. It is a third-party management add-on stuff. It's not a part of AOSP. Vendors add it after the fact, before they ship a device. So HTC, Motorola, Samsung, LG, Pantech, Sony, these guys add it into their devices. It's basically meant to be like a common device management. It's kind of like an earlier concept of MDM before MDM became what it is, included in the devices. We found the access to be able to play with additional APIs to silently install and delete apps, to change secure settings, things that normal apps are not allowed to do, is completely gated by whether or not you have a 3LM certificate in your cert chain. So, and there's more. Now keep in mind, that FakeID is a vulnerability. Each one of these things are exploit vectors, right? And these vectors affect different devices at different times depending upon the composition of the device. But let's be clear, the vulnerability is present in all versions of Android. The vectors will vary, and this is not the entire scope of all the vectors. It's a general purpose problem. Any code that checks certificates in this interestingly different way than standard Android is going to be vulnerable. Those are just more vectors. But in terms of kind of just a good showcase of vectors, we feel this is a good start. So how does an attacker actually build an exploit with this? So they're going to create an app that has evil code to do their evil thing, whatever evil is for their personal motives, steal money, steal pics, whatever. They're going to isolate that trusted certificate, so which vector do they want to use, and pick the certificate related to that vector, that trusted certificate. Then they're going to go through that process that I showed you, that I kind of visually depicted. They're going to generate a self-signed cert. They're going to update the issuer of that certificate to the trusted cert. And then they're going to use kind of standard tools to package all that combination cert into the standard kind of certificate key stores that the Java signing tools and Android tools consume and use. And then just use the standard Android tools to sign it and ship it. And kind of displayed on the lower right there is Python code that does, it's 13 lines, and that's the entirety of how to generate a bad cert. Right? So the whole mission can be accomplished in 13 lines of Python code, in terms of generating that cert, setting the issuer, doing the update, puking it out to a PKCS blob, and calling it done. That's all it takes. So if we were walking through what an attacker would do, they'd start with their trusted cert, which kind of show there I dumped it to OpenSSL. I'm aiming for the Adobe cert. I'll generate that new certificate, just like I mentioned, and then just double checking the certificate using OpenSSL to dump out the contents of my new evil certificate. In yellow, you can kind of see the subject. The child cert is BlueBox. And who's the issuer? The issuer is Adobe. Right? That's exactly what we want, using that code I just showed you. Then we'll just use standard key tool to import all this stuff up into an evil key store. This is just Java key store, so Java tools could use it. And then we'll use the jar signer tool, standard Java, to just use our evil key store and sign an app, that evil app with all of our evil code. And so kind of highlighted here, I kind of show I'm making an evil Flash plugin. So the tool just signs that plugin and calls it done. Then we just get this app onto devices, however means you want to distribute the malware, that's your choice. And as soon as it's run, bad things happen. So great example, a non-live example, is basically, I ADB install that app just for a quick push. The app's installed. In the meantime, I'm watching Logcat, which is kind of like the debug output of Android device. And you can kind of see, like, the app's on, Android saying, cool, I got this new app, I'm getting it ready to run, okay, cool, got it installed. And then all of a sudden, this stuff in yellow starts showing up, which is like, hey, this is our evil plugin that just got virally injected into all the other apps and executed, is now running in the code processes of the other apps. And so now we're like, oh yeah, here's our plugin. We're running in this process. We're running in this other process. We're running in this other process. Part of that distribution, what's in that code, is that they'll take our evil plugin out of our app and push it into other apps. So rather than kind of talk about it, let me actually show it to you a bit more live so you can really get a feel for exactly how this thing plays out. So what I'm going to do, what I've got here is I basically made an evil app. The evil app externally says it's a fake Google services update, has a cute little Google icon and everything. Right? Internally, it's a malicious WebKit plugin. Okay, so, and that means we're going to use the Adobe vector. We're going to use the Adobe certificate to act like a fake Flash plugin to all other apps. That's my evil app. So then we need to, what's going to happen is we're going to distribute our evil app onto the device, so our app will get installed. Now, inside our app kind of is that malicious plugin, that little red little block there, right? As soon as it gets installed, the system is going to pull our plugin out of our evil app, and it's going to get injected into all the other apps. Okay? And when that happens, it's going to be executed immediately. What I've done is I embedded a Drozer backchannel payload that will connect to a command and control server. For those of you not familiar with Drozer, it's kind of like Metasploit. So it's a way kind of like to have command and control of an Android device or app on a device, and once it connects up, you get CNC control to do all kinds of sorted stuff. You know, dump processes, steal files, upload, download files, get passwords, all the typical things you would imagine a command and control kind of console would offer. So that's essentially what we want to try to achieve here in this. So let me go ahead and flip over to the live bits. So what I've got here, I've got a phone sitting here. This is an Android phone. It is vulnerable to the fake ID. Now, interestingly enough, Friday, what, 6 days ago, 5 days ago, 5 days ago, I walked into Best Buy, I picked a phone off the shelf, I bought it, it's this phone. This is not something that's been sitting in a closet that's ancient and old or whatever. I bought this phone new from Best Buy on Friday. Here it is. Right? So it's new to me too. Right? This is current, this is shipping, this is commercial, this is normal, right? There's nothing special about this. So I'm going to go ahead and run my Drozer server here. That's starting. So I got my device. What I'm going to essentially do is I'm going to pull up my email, because, you know, that's what we do. I got an email from my friendly IT department. It's saying, oh, we discovered a problem on Android, data corruption, blah, blah, blah. Your friendly nudge, nudge, wink, wink IT department, that's totally legit, by the way, encourage you to install this Android update that's in this attachment. Have any questions, feel free to phone our help desk. Oh, yeah, sure, that sounds good. But let's just say I get it, or I'm duped, go ahead, I will go ahead and install the app. So I get a pop-up. Now, so this app wants to be installed, requires no special access. Now here's an interesting point though. Normally when a user goes and installs an app, they see a big long list of crap that's really scary here. It needs to read your SMS. It wants to talk to email. It needs GPS access. It needs to do all kinds of assorted stuff. None of that's here. This app, from a permissions model, a true Android permissions model, needs 0 permissions. So even the user education concept of don't install apps that ask for scary stuff, this app asks for nothing. It's safe, right? I mean, what can it do? If everyone thinks in terms of the Android security model, they'll be like, well, if it's not asking for SMS, it can't access it. If it's not asking for email, it can't access it. It's not asking for anything, so this can't do anything, so sure, I'll install it. It seems safe. Yeah, you want to see how that plays out? Install. Boom. So all that stuff on the right, each one of these is now a reverse backchannel shell from a popped app on that phone. I got 5 of them. So that just means just by installing it, I now just compromise 5 apps. They just phone back home to the command and control server right there. Right? Now, also interesting, this doesn't require the user to go and launch the app, which is also another step that typical malware has to do, because there's no way to get first-time run, first-time execution control, just purely by installing it. But this one, having no permissions and will immediately start running exactly when it's installed, you never actually have to launch the app itself after it was installed. Right? So we just cut out like multiple fundamental user interactive steps to propagate malware out of the equation, and just made this instantaneous upon installation with no permissions necessary. So let's look at our shells. So for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with Drozer, I definitely encourage you to kind of, peek around. It's a fully capable thing. It's much like Metasploit in terms of it gives lots of interesting capabilities to do all kinds of fun stuff. So I've got 5 shells waiting. These represent 5 individual apps that were compromised. So I can go ahead and kind of see inside the apps. So just as an example, right, I just connected to an app through a reverse command and control shell. This is the type of stuff an attacker would do. And now I'm running commands from on the device remotely through that app. And I inherit all permissions, all access, all everything of that app. So ironically, even though the malware dropper evil application I installed didn't need internet access and didn't need log access or read and write access, because I virally injected into another app, I just use their internet access. I just use their log access. I get to basically pivot and proxy and abuse their permissions. I didn't need any direct permissions myself. So, you can keep running and use Drozer for what it's designed to do. It certainly does all kinds of fun stuff. Just for the sake of timing here, I kind of, let's run this again. Live demo failure. This is actually trying to connect to every single one of those and dump some info about it. So here's a good example, right? In terms of the apps on the phone that are now compromised. I got Microsoft SkyDrive. Here's a list of all its files. I'm running a SkyDrive now inside it. I'm running inside of Google Mail. I'm running inside of Salesforce. I'm running inside a privacy app shipped by Metro PCS. I'm running inside the Capital One app. Right? My virus code, that viral malicious plugin, is now inside every single one of these apps running, meaning it can have access to all passwords, all data, all files. It is the app. It was merged code running in that app. And that's essentially FakeID. So, slightly scary stuff. Very real. Actually kind of breaks some of our thought process at how users would mitigate and manage untrusted apps. We got rid of a lot of steps that we normally rely on being there as signs of something being malicious, right? So the good question, what can you do? Well, for better or for worse, step 1 is always get your patch firmware, right? Your OTA updates. We did work with Google back in April in terms of, disclosing the fix, coordinating the release. A lot of vendors have actually gotten to the ecosystem and released patches onto devices, even today, which is good. But generally speaking, the best solution to remove the risk, to remove the vulnerability, is you need an updated firmware that doesn't include the vulnerability. In the meantime, you can use the free BlueBox security scanner. It's the same scanner we used for MasterKey last year. We updated it to indicate whether or not you're patched for FakeID. So you can go ahead and actually look and see if your patch update has occurred yet and you're fixed or not, and manage your risk accordingly. And of course, it's always good to have good security hygiene. This will help mitigate the risk. If you don't have a patch, what can you do in the meantime? This is the standard stuff, right? Stick to your known application sources for your apps, right? Don't download sketchy things from sketchy places and run them and hope that those permissions actually show you what it's trying to do. Because as you saw, you can't rely on that being accurate in this case. Specifically speaking, KitKat 4.4 and later is patched against the Adobe exploit vector. Not the vulnerability, but the exploit vector. Simply because KitKat actually moved away from using WebKit into Chromium, so they changed all it, and they kind of ripped out all that vulnerable code, essentially. Not as a solution to fix anything from a security perspective, they just switched to something else and got rid of that code. So KitKat doesn't have this Adobe problem, but it does have the others. In terms of what else is on the device. And then, of course, if you are using 3LM on your device, you won't know it probably until it's too late. So go ahead and you can check your security properties. And then, of course, device admin access, always a good one. Don't hand it out like candy, people. Really bad things actually hide behind device admin access that even play into the FakeID stuff. Yeah, so that's it for me. That's FakeID in a nutshell. Right after this talk, I'm going to go ahead and wander over to the BlueBox kiosk in Innovation City on the trade show floor. So if you want to meet up with me for the next couple hours, I'll be there till 4. Feel free to swing by, say hi. We can talk about this some more, and let me know your thoughts. Thank you very much.